back on the 0 Hour. This is your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As this election hopefully draws to an end, I feel that executive producer Troy Miller and I have been sort of, foxhole friends through we've been doing the show for years, but through an utterly insane year that feels like it was 30 years long. Hopefully, this episode of All Our Lives is coming to an end, but Troy joins us now just by way of introduction. Troy is the executive producer of this show, the man behind the curtain, so to speak, and he is also a writer. He lives in West Virginia. He's an activist there. And so, Troy, am I crazy to feel somehow like we're just kind of stragglers back from some Civil War battle or something? How do you feel?
Yeah. No, I don't think you're crazy to feel like that, for one. And for my point of view, I mean, you've heard me say this, and for our audience's sake, I used to write for Tom Hartman's program back when he was on RT, and that was nightmarish in 2015 and 2016. It was a lot like this election where, we had our spur of hope there for like, we can get a progressive candidate and all this, and then finally the resignation of, okay, we'll go with Joe Biden. Is it really the strongest thing? And then, you couldn't have, no one, the COVID response just really, changed everything in terms of the dynamics, right? I would not have thought 6 months ago that Joe Biden would be leading in the polling by as much as he is. And I think,
Right.
The issue of seniors, you and I both know, talking about this, the issue of seniors, the issues of disabled Americans, the issues of have become the issues of all Americans because of the pandemic. And the administration has basically shown that, and they've said as much, that suburban housewives they're concerned about. And other than that, they don't care to keep FCC language safe. Do those square with your feelings?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the COVID thing upended everything. And I know about 2 months ago, a friend of mine is a Democratic consultant, progressive Democratic consultant, said, well, the fundamentals look very good for us. And I remember saying to him, what fundamentals? You mean the fundamentals for how elections go when there's a pandemic and everybody's trying to vote by mail, but the president is trying to slow down the post office? And, I don't think we have fundamentals for something like this. But I think what it did, look, it even did it to me. It was, when the nomination was being finalized for the Democrats, I was thinking, oh, man, I don't want to have to spend the next 6 months defending, Hunter Biden's, Burisma operation or everything. But, even with this laptop thing, it's like, forget it. It's fine. Just get this Trump guy out of there. And I know, it's a sort of betrayal of my left-wing values in a certain way. But there's a point when, first of all, I think country will be better off. But secondly, you just get like, I think maybe it's just today, but there's a point where you just get a little bit worn down. It's like, okay, let's all take a deep national breath. Let's hit the mute button on this presidency, and then let's regroup and figure out how to, get the revolution going. I guess that's my take.
Well, and that's it, right? And there's a few things I'll add to that. First of all, this idea of normalcy. Normal changes, right? Because our baseline of what would be normal has shifted so far from what it would have been in 2017 or 2018 or even 2019. And I think it's not unfair to say, and I hate to sound like pessimistic about this, but I think right now, like today, is probably the last most normal time we're going to have for a few months. Because I don't see any possible outcome here where Donald Trump lets us go through this without a constitutional crisis. And that's, terrifying because I don't even know what that looks like. And so many of the levers of power are controlled by Republicans because they've been playing this long game. And I want to get Donald Trump out of office for a lot of reasons. And one of the biggest ones is because he distracts us from where real power lies, which is in all of our local offices, right?
In our
Where,
local offices
yeah,
and in
yeah,
judgeships and,
right. And
yes,
these are, as you said in your introduction of me, I'm in West Virginia. There are races here that can be won with dozens of votes. That is change that an individual can affect by going door to door. And what Trump has been very successful at with us, with over the last 4 years, is, and it's the first step of totalitarianism, is convincing individuals that they are powerless. Confronting people with such an overwhelming show of force and uncaring that they resign and are thankful for any time they're not under attack. And you've seen this throughout this administration, right? We keep on getting threatened with, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut Social Security, we're going to cut Medicare, we're going to attack this. And then we're supposed to be thankful when they don't follow through with their awful plans, right? It's like a bully in the schoolyard saying he's going to beat you up unless you do this. And then you don't do that, and he doesn't beat you up, and you're supposed to walk home and feel like that was a good day.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's, there are a lot of psychological terms, right, to play around with that. I mean, one of them is learned helplessness,
Right.
where, they put an electric shock through the dog every time he steps on the plate. Then he stops stepping on it, even when there's no more electricity running. He gives up. It's a horrible experiment, by the way. Monsters designed it, but the concept of learned helplessness applies here, and the concept of just the bullying description you described is apt. There's this sort of Stockholm syndrome where you're just grateful that your kidnappers aren't hurting you any more than they already have. And but the challenge for the left, I think, is that the Democratic Party has basically presented itself from decades now as, okay, we won't hurt you the way the other guys will.
Right.
I mean, you still won't get to play, you still won't get recess, you still won't get school books or pencils or maybe we'll get you a few, but at least we won't beat you up, and that doesn't electrify people to go out and vote. So,
Right. And I mean, looking forward, no matter how this election goes, the same things are going to be true that were true in 2015, that were true in 2011, 2012. Choose your year. And it's that decades of the Democrats going, we don't want to hurt you as bad, but you're going to have to give some things up, right? You can't have real robust public education. You can't have a party that's going to actually stand for unions. Because we have this whole idea that, globalization is going to happen, that Paul Krugman 1990 sort of inevitability of trade and how a rising tide lifts all boats. And as a consequence, domestically, now we have places, I'm thinking of, there's a candidate down in Nelsonville, Ohio, who he was a pro-union Democrat, and the unions all ended up supporting his Republican opponent. And part of the reasoning is that, the Republicans are going to win down there. It's a Rust Belt area. And so if the unions support the Republicans, then maybe they can work with the Republicans to not get bashed so bad in legislation. Maybe the right to work stuff won't be so brutal. Right to work for less. Sorry, I should always call it by its proper name. So how do we as Democrats, and I am a Democrat, in a state where it is very unpopular to be one right now, how do we convince people that we actually are fighting for not just the ideals of FDR and even Teddy Roosevelt, the progressive Republican, but also addressing the needs of the 21st century and going above and beyond those ideas? And, the basic economic Bill of Rights that FDR put forward, if I'm remembering correctly, included basically universal health care. We haven't even gotten that, and
yeah, no, he was, he articulated that. There were actually bills around in his time. Senator Wagner was one of the ones pushing them. Can't remember who else. And this British economist who designed the national health system over there came to the
Beverage. Yeah.
U.S. Beverage in the early 40s, and I mean, there was discussion. Roosevelt never threw his muscle behind it, but
Right.
yeah, it's been kicked around for a long time. And part of the, to me, a big part of the problem, and I struggle with this all the time, and I've bumped up against it a lot over the years, is a lot of Democrats. I was an independent for a while. I came back, but a lot of Democrats, my generation, say baby boomers, Gen Xers, some millennials too, a lot of long-term Democrats have sort of internalized this worldview that says things are really complicated. You think you understand them, but you don't, number one. And number two, they really hate leftists, like especially economic leftists, way more in some ways than they hate, John Kasich or somebody.
Right.
Because, and my theory of it is because over the years they've convinced themselves that nothing better is possible, and it's just annoying as hell for them when someone comes along and says, well, actually it kind of is if most people support it, which is why so many people I know, some of whom have been, kind of friends of mine for years, but like have just hated Bernie, hate
Right.
AOC, hate
Right.
any of this stuff. They probably have the same values that those politicians do,
Right.
but it just really annoys that. My theory, it just really annoys them to be reminded of the mental and other compromises they've made by somebody saying, you know what, we can do this better.
Right. And
That's
there's,
my theory.
yeah. And I get a lot of this pushback from friends of mine who are like Democratic insiders, and they've worked their way up through the little ranks of the parties, and they've bought into this technocratic thing. And I really think that, the centrist wing of the Democratic Party, Joe Manchin being accepted, because I don't think he has I don't think he's quite the thinker that some of the other Democrats are, but they should be called technocrats. And I really think the Republicans should be called egocrats at this point, and we need a real Democratic Party. And there is an insurgency with AOC and the squad and the growing squad. Kathy Kunkel, who we just talked to, were she to be in office, would certainly be a part of that. But is it, it's, we have, you and I have talked about this off air before. There's this sort of expectation that that AOC is going to save us, or Bernie's going to save us, and it doesn't matter how many times they go up on stage and say that they're not. It's not about them. There's something, and I think it's a very American thing. I think it's a very American elevation of the individual that we have going all the way back to, George Washington cut down the cherry tree, couldn't tell a lie. Johnny Appleseed planted every apple in the country. Go to the legends of the Alamo, all of this. It's a hyper individualization. And I think we've internalized that in our politics. I think it goes along with.
Oh, for sure. This is, and Bernie, for example, was so adamant about always, I remember when he was just getting started, there was a little thing in, I forget, one of the parks here in DC near the Capitol. He talked to like maybe 100 people, right? Before the very first start of his,
his very first announcement. I remember that before he went.
Well, it was right after that.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't that one, but it was like a couple days later, and somebody said, "We love you," and Bernie's, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really do, but it really isn't about me. And yet they kept doing that. It reminded me of Life of Brian, where they're just like, he kept saying it's not about me. And then finally,
only
he
the
says,
true Messiah.
Yeah, he says, just F off. How shall we F off, oh Lord? It's, Ella Baker, the great civil rights leader who trained generations of civil rights activists, said a strong people don't need strong leaders. And that's the, kind of movement I believe in.
Right. And it's the need for a movement, not a moment, right? And that's the other thing that I've personally, with my, allyship with the West Virginia Can't Wait campaign and my near candidacy with them, which, by the way, the only reason I didn't have to run against Kathy Kunkel in the primary, not because she's like, even if we completely agree on everything, I think people should have had had more of a choice than just having her go through. I think she's a fantastic candidate, but the only reason I didn't run was because I would have had to leave my health insurance behind, my employer-based health insurance, and
Yeah, well, that's
that is,
huge.
yeah, and that's when I realized I doubled down on my fight for Medicare for all, because this would strengthen our democracy. How many other candidates are potential game-changing candidates across the country are being held back because they have to leave their health insurance or they don't have a steady health insurance?
Yeah, and that's Randy Bryce's his iron pack. That's part of what he's trying to do with that. And we should have Randy back on. But
Oh yeah.
also, let's be honest, Troy, you didn't run because you would have had to cut your hair too.
Well, not for a, we would have tested that with the people through the conversations. It would have been, after the questions about what are you most concerned about as a citizen, it would have been, if I were running on your behalf, would you like me to have
Right.
long hair? We would have vetted that one out. Yeah, yeah, and I would have had to leave all of our audience behind. But
They
it's
would have missed you. I would have missed you. The
Yeah,
but
but
the
just
West
back to
Virginia.
back to that exactly. And Stephen Smith's campaign was fantastic in my opinion. Not just because his messaging was great. He has a very populist message, not right, left, top versus bottom. That's what the fight always is. It's us versus the good old boys. Fantastic messaging, but the fact that it was always geared up for the next phase of what happens
Right,
if he
exactly.
loses, and building that candidate slate that Kathy talked about, that she's a part of. Natalie Klein. We have, I think we're the only state with 4 Democratic women running in the general right now, with Paula Jean Swearingen running in the Senate, Natalie Klein in the first district, Kathy Kunkel here in the second district, and Hillary Turner, or yeah, I think it's Hillary Turner down in the third district. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. And they're all fantastic. They're all very strong progressive candidates, and they've all done very well with individual fundraising because there is room for this movement building. And
And exactly right. And every candidacy, whether they win or lose, is a movement building opportunity.
right,
And I guess we're going to have to close, but I always
yeah,
think of, I was never a big Beto O'Rourke fan, but his campaign helped, even though he lost, helped elect the Black Girl Magic slate of judges and other down ballot candidates, and created organizing opportunities for the future. That's what's happening in West Virginia. So I'm a big believer in that. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and wrap the show up. But thanks for surviving this election year with me, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next. That's for sure.
yeah. It's been as much of a pleasure as it could be. So thank you, Richard. I always feel like the genie being let out of the bottle when I get to sit down with you on air. So. Well,
Well,
yep, but I
we'll
can
do it
tell
again
you we're
soon.
out of time. So,
Yeah, you're the guy to tell me. Okay, so what? We'll take a quick break, and then I'll do a sign off. And that's it. So Troy Miller, executive producer, thanks, and we'll be right back.